Bem-vindos, mais um Here's the Thing, um programa semanal que falamos ou conversamos com pessoas de interesse na nossa comunidade e outras comunidades em geral. Estamos no tempo de Páscoa, estamos num tempo de reflexão, celebrando a ressurreição de Cristo e por isso achamos importante falar com uma pessoa que realmente está envolvida no ramo do que eu digo, no negócio de Deus, em que realmente, como tudo, as nossas igrejas estão sofrendo um pouco neste momento por causa da realidade do Covid, mas ao mesmo tempo as celebrações continuam e a vida religiosa não para, porque faz falta para muitas pessoas, principalmente nesta ocasião em que muita gente está fechada em casa e precisa de um pouco do Espírito de Deus nas suas vidas. E então, hoje vamos falar com um padre que ainda é novo, e eu acho que a visão dele, por ser novo, é muito importante nestas ocasiões, tanto da nossa Igreja Católica, mas também da liderança do Papa e de outros assuntos religiosos. A entrevista vai ser feita em inglês, mas, como sabem, todos devemos falar um pouco da língua para compreendermos do país onde vivemos. Our guest today is Frade Conrad Fernandes. Frade Fernandes has got a last name that sounds Portuguese, but I don't think he's mastered the Portuguese language just yet.
Nowhere near.
Maybe just a little bit. Father Conrad is the associate pastor at St. Francis of Assisi Church, and he's also the vocational director. He was ordained at St. Francis in 2013, but has also served at St. Peter's Church in Woodbridge. Welcome, Father Conrad. Why did you become a priest in the Catholic Church?
First, Manny, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Why did I become a priest in the Catholic Church? That is an excellent question. I suppose the short answer would be because I became convinced that this is where God was calling me to serve. The long answer will take some more time, and if you would like me to dig into that, we can...
Just short, a little bit, because I think it provides some information, a little bit of information on your vision, on what took you as a young man to embrace your vision of wanting to serve God.
Certainly. I think as a young man in my late teens, early 20s, I was very much searching for some kind of a meaningful life to live, some way of living life that was meaningful. And as I was exploring this question, I encountered a number of priests who, living their vocation as best as they could, seemed to be giving service to the church, seemed to be living fulfilling lives for themselves. And this struck me as something interesting. I wanted to understand this more. And so I spent time talking with them and asking questions, and in the process of these conversations, deepening and exploring my own faith. And as time went on, I started to realize that the things I wanted to see in myself, to have in my own life, these men were living as a part of their vocation, as a part of their priesthood, as a part of living as Franciscans. And so I thought to myself, this is something worth exploring. Mind you, when I entered the Franciscan order, when I entered my studies, I was not 100% convinced that this is what I wanted to do. I started by saying, there's something worthwhile here, I want to see if it's for me. And so that's how I began.
There was also an education.
There was an education.
In parallel of what you may or may not wanting to become.
There was an education aspect, certainly. The education that we go through is very much geared toward ministry. So the idea was the formation that I'm getting is for a purpose, is for the purpose of serving the church. The primary question is always, do I belong here? Is this where God is calling me? Is this where I want to live my life? And as we went through that, I became more and more convinced that the answer was yes. And then the education became very important because I needed to be good at it in order to serve the church, in order to execute my ministry. I was a slightly above average student. I was not excellent by any stretch of the imagination, but good enough that I think I'm sufficiently equipped for my ministry now.
We are at Easter.
Mm-hmm.
We're celebrating one of the most important dates in the Catholic calendar, the resurrection of Christ. If there was the sacrifice or the miracle of the resurrection of Christ, if there's one thing that you could tell our viewers that this means something to them, what happened to Christ and God calling Christ to the heavens, what would you say to someone about what this really means and should mean in their lives at this time of the year, especially?
I think there is an old saying is that as the church prays, so it believes. And I think when we come to the Easter Vigil liturgy especially, there's a prayer relatively early in the liturgy which we call the Exultet. And sometimes it is sung, sometimes it is recited, depending on your parish. I think it is worthwhile for every Catholic to take the time to read that prayer and reflect on it, because I think it answers your question most fully. The mystery of the death, the passion, the death, and the resurrection of Christ really is at the heart, at the very center of our faith. Not just because it's a message, but because it speaks an eternal truth to how we live our lives, to the reality we find within our lives. We find this suffering that we all encounter, which is reflected in Christ's passion. We find the sense of loss and death that we all encounter, which is reflected in Christ's death on the cross. We find a mourning, a grieving that we all encounter, which is reflected in the striving, the difficulty the apostles faced between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. And then we find the joy of new life, which we encounter on Easter Sunday. So there's this reflection in the Triduum and our own lives, but there is also included in that a promise that is given to us. It is the fulfillment of the ancient promise given to Adam and Eve, and it is the new promise given to us that our lives wrapped up in Christ are not contained only to this life, that we go beyond.